Good evening, everyone, and wonderful to see again the base Masechet so full. It's always nice, as wonderful as it is to have people online. It's always very special to see everyone here for today. So just to, I guess, to chazara on what we spoke about on Sunday, and just see some of the ideas that we discussed inside the Rishonim, and then to go forward. So the first Torah we looked at was the issue around Gerusos. Tosfos amended the Gersa to Kol HaKelim Hanitolin Shabbos, because Tosfos didn't think it was possible for the Mishnah to read Kol HaKelim Nitolin Shabbos. In other words, it can't be that the Mishnah is saying that all Kelim can be moved on Shabbos, because this simply isn't correct. There are Kelim which are Muktza. That's Tosfos's Gersa change to resolve that issue. So I guess two or three small points on this. The first is subsequent to our conversation on Sunday, and as I prepared these Makomis, I don't know if anyone had a chance to look, but the Chedushay Haran makes the point that in Tosfos's Gersa, you also have this Vov. So it's Kol HaKelim Hanitolim B'Shabbos, Daltoteihem in mind, and you remove the Vov. So our Gersa has effectively, every Mishnah consists of a case on a Halacha. So in our Gersa, I'm just going to mute everyone because I'm getting a bit of interference here. Sorry. Ready? So in our Gersa, the first case is Kol HaKelim, any KD, and the first halacha is nitolin, that they can be moved. The second case is the Daltoteihem and their tolosas, and the halacha on that is that imohen, they can also be moved. So it's two cases with two halachas. In Tosfos's Gersa, it's really one case with one halacha. Kol HaKelim nitolin b'Shabbos, Daltoteihem imohen. So the case is Kol HaKelim nitolin, any KD which isn't Muktza, it's deles, and the halacha is that the deles is imohen. The deles is also the deles of the KD is also mutter. So those are the two Gersais. In the Yeshiv of our Gersa, I suggested that anything which is completely Muktza, in other words, not even more than a klishah melachot issa, but it's completely Muktza. Anything which is completely Muktza is, by definition, according to Rashi, at least in several places, as far as I could see, not a KD. And as the whole logic of why, let's say, this chalsa that Tosfos mentions, this very large wickerwork vessel, is Muktza, is, as Rashi explains there, because lav Torah's kli olav, it's not a kli. When it becomes large enough, it ceases to be a movable utensil, and therefore it's not a kli, and that would be a yishuv of our Gersa. Now, several people pointed out that Rashi also seems to give a different, Rashi Bayas seems to give a different answer to the question, and Rashi seems to make the statement that the explanation of the Mishnah is any KD which has a deles isn't Muktza. And I still struggle to understand that. I mean, a chalsa, for example, you could imagine a very large wickerwork basket that has a delet to it. Nonetheless, again, in preparing the sugya, there are many Rishonim that do say such language. For example, the Ran again, which I mentioned. So the Ran adds a little bit of Sforah. In the first column of the Ran, at the bottom of page 1, the Ran says, "V'li ein tzorich kach." I don't think we need to change the Gersa. So after he brings Tosfos' point, he says, "The shopping kosin Kol HaKelim nitolin b'Shabbos." So given the Katani v'Daltoteihem imohen, since it says Daltoteihem imohen, shopping mashma d'lemari ela b'kelim asuyim latzniya v'hem shenach nata. So he says any KD which has a lid, a sort of deles to it, by definition is a KD that's used to store things in. And if it's used to store things in, then it's a storage KD, which by definition isn't Muktza because it's used for something. So I don't completely get this. I mean, why couldn't you have a chalsa again, a very large utensil that has a deles, and this wouldn't apply to?
Fixed in the ground thing.
From being correct, if something is very large or it's fixed in the ground, it ceases to be a kli.
Elsewhere, that Muktza is saying it's something, it's equivalent to being fixed at the ground, and therefore it's not usable. In Mevatel Kli Meir Chomer, Rashi says that the consequence of something being Muktza is that it becomes fixed in the ground. But here we're going the other way around. Tosfos says, how can the Mishnah say that any KD isn't Muktza? It's not true. There are KD and there are Muktza. So one answer, I think, which is a good answer, is by definition, if it's a KD, it's not completely Muktza. It's not the most severe case of Muktza. And you could understand that one way of understanding the halachas of Muktza is, at least with respect to Shabbos, lav Torah's KD olav. Even though maybe with respect to other halachas this is Muktza, but with respect to Shabbos isn't a KD. That's one possibility. Rashi on the Mishnah seems to give a different answer to the question, and he seems to say that any KD which has a deles isn't Muktza. I don't understand why that is, but since then I've seen that many of the Rishonim say similar language. including the Ran, who adds a little nugget of svara to that. And the Ran says, if it has a deles, it's because it's used for storing things in. If it's used for storing things in, then it's not muktzah. Because there could be kelim which are muktzah, but maybe hammers and saws and pens and pencils and phones and all sorts of things. But kelim that are used for storage aren't muktzah. That's how the Ran seems to say it. So I can't say I completely understand it, but anyway, that's what the Chidushei Ran says. Okay, so that's just tidying up one part of what we spoke about on Sunday. Tidying up the next part of what we spoke about is I printed here the Ritva, and the Ritva spells out what I think.
Sorry,
yes.
Sorry, Sedgar. I missed the first minute, so sorry. Where does Rashi mention lav Torah's clear? I saw it in the Ritva, but where is it a different Rashi? Sorry.
Sorry. Rashi in Kufnan Zayin Amud Aleph and many other places in Shas, where Tosfos brings the Kagon Chalsa. So if you look up that case of Chalsa there in Kufnan Zayin, you'll see that Rashi says lav Torah's clear love.
Okay, fine. Sorry, it's just interesting. It doesn't mention it in our sugya here, whereas the Ritva that you gave us to look at.
Correct. Rashi. This was really.
Does I think.
I was sort of when I gave this point in Shiur, a few people on Sunday said to me, "Well, Rashi gives a different answer to the question." And at the time, I think I waffled a bit because I've been so puzzled by Rashi that I had sort of convinced myself that Rashi can't be meaning what he says, which is not good practice anyway. So that's number one. But number two, since then I'm a little older and wiser, and I've seen the Rishonim, and the Rishonim all give this answer, and they all say, or not all obviously, but many of them say this answers. So it's clear Rashi means what he says, which I probably should have accepted all along. And Rashi says that the pshat in the mission is kol HaKelim, which have the losses are not Muktza. I remain confused because, in theory at least, I could think of Kelim that have the losses that are Muktza, but that's what the Rishonim say. I argued on Sunday that there's a circularity about Rashi also, that any Keli which has a deles, Rashi says, isn't Muktza, because if it is Muktza, it wouldn't be a Keli. But having seen the Rishonim, I don't think that's a good reading. So I'm just putting forward as a svara in Tosfos, a svara to counter Tosfos' argument that you could justify our Girsa by saying that to the degree that it's Muktza, lav Torah's Keli Olav, but Rashi, as you point out, Edgar doesn't say that. Okay, so that's really all I wanted to say in terms of that part of what I'd commented on. The second horror I mentioned on Sunday is that I mentioned that there's I think a diuk in the Mishnah. Not everyone was convinced of it, and I hear why not everyone is convinced. But the simplest reading of the Mishnah seems to imply that it thinks it is a chiddush that a deles isn't mukta. Because again, whichever version of Girsa you have in the Mishnah certainly, the first line of the Mishnah certainly, amongst other things, comes to tell us that the deles is not mukta. Now that seemingly is obvious. I mean, why on earth should the deles of a Keli be mukta? The chiddush seems to be the continuation of that, which is afal pishin isparku she'enon zomim, etc. So the chiddush is that even when the deles falls apart and detaches, even then it's not mukta. There's the core idea that an attached delet isn't mukta. Is there any chiddush in that? Seemingly not. And yet the Mishnah does seem to say it's a chiddush. I mean, the Mishnah could have phrased itself differently, because it says kol HaKelim netanim Shabbos, v'tavos t'seinish nisparku b'Shabbos, or tavos t'seinish nisparku imahim. And it doesn't. It says all kelim are not mukta, and their deles isn't mukta, and even though they fell apart on either Shabbos or weekday, however we read the Mishnah. So again, I just want to show this inside. The Ritva, I think, makes this diuk really, and the Ritva thinks there's a chiddush. Let's just look at source 2 at the top line. Masyisin kol HaKelim netanim b'Shabbos, does say in mind afal pishin nisparku b'Shabbos, even though they fell apart. Pirish kol HaKelim afal pishin gedolim k'gen shidot teva migdol netanim b'Shabbos. So the Ritva says there's a chiddush in the first line of the Mishnah that all kelim, even though they're big, are nonetheless not mukta. Number 2, v'tal sesei and shleish and b'tziton netanim nemaim. The deles which they have on their side also is not mukta. And there's a chiddush in this, afal pisha hein asuyin shemisparkim mehem, even though they are they have a tendency to detach, ein sorich lefarkon, you don't have to detach them. And as the Ritva was saying, there's a chiddush over here that evidently we're talking here about a deles which has a habit of falling off, or has the possibility of falling off. Therefore, you could have thought that let's go the other way around. If it would fall off, it would become mukta. and therefore, how can you use it on Shabbos? How can you leave this delet on the cupboard in Shabbos? Because if it falls off, it will be Muktza. So maybe you have to detach it before Shabbos because it's a Muktza entity. It's a Muktza door. Kamash Manon, you don't have to detach it. It isn't Muktza, it's part of the KD. And therefore, even if it does fall off, like the continuation of the Muktza of the Mishnah, it's not Muktza. So, in other words, you could jump either way. We have a box. The box has a lid of sorts, an attached lid. The lid can detach or not, as the case may be. So you could argue, as the Mishnah says, which is, in the meantime, the lid is attached, therefore it's not Muktza, therefore even if it falls off, it remains not Muktza. Or you could jump the other way around. Since the lid has a tendency to fall off, and when it falls off, it'll be a useless item, therefore the lid, even when it's still attached, would be Muktza, and therefore should be detached before Shabbos. That's the Chiddush of the Mishnah, that we don't say it that way round. That's what the Ritva says. Again, we had a bit of discussion about whether this is a diuk or not, but the Ritva at least thinks it's a diuk. Yeah.
Is there a nafkamina between the Rashi and the Ritva in a situation where if you build a cupboard and you haven't yet the door on the cupboard? So my understanding was in that situation, according to Ritva, that door hasn't got a status yet of a kli, therefore you couldn't move it. But according to Rashi, because it's muhan, in its inherent value, because it's going to become part of the kli, you could move it.
Well, it hasn't become part of the kli yet.
Yeah, but it's designed to become part of the kli. We set it up for that purpose, that it's muhan to be part of the kli. Therefore, you'd have enough gamina between the two if you hadn't yet put it on the first.
So I hadn't thought of the shaila. It's an interesting shaila. What happens if the door's not yet attached? I hear both svaras you're putting forward. So you could argue it's not yet attached and therefore it's not yet muchan. Or you could say since it's designed to be attached, that's already called muchan. What I don't hear is where you're getting a diuk from Rashi and Ritva about that, shaila.
No, Ritva's his whole emphasis is the fact that once you've attached it, it becomes part of the kli, and you call it a kli. Whether
the later Ritva, you mean, or the Ritva we're just looking at? Where?
The very end of the first paragraph. The Einan don't tabayit. And I mean, because you see the Daltoteihem, the bayit is a kli, and therefore the doors can't become a kli on the back of the bayit. Whilst here, the door of the cupboard becomes a kli on the back of the cupboard.
That line is definitely true, and the Ritz was written it very beautifully. But where do you? But that lichor is anyway muchach in the Gemara. The shiddur teva, or whatever, the box or the KD over here is a KD, and the lid is a KD because it serves the master KD. It serves the original thing that's on top of. So I don't see where you see in that a machlokas Rashi and Tosfos. I hear a very interesting shaila that you're asking, which is, does something become can the lids be attached to the KD conceptually, even though it hasn't been attached physically since Omen for that? That's a very good shmak shaila. I don't see a diuk can.
The cupboard, the bit of the cupboard door is no longer, it's not a kli. That's agreed, yes? It's not yet been attached to the kli, and therefore it must be muktza at that point until it's attached, because it's no longer got Torah kli on it. That would be correct, wouldn't it?
It's l'chura, unless you say your svara that since you're planning to attach it, that's already enough to link it. But my guess would be like you're saying, that till it's attached, it's not been part of it. Yeah. And in Rashi, you think differently. Like, where do you see that in Rashi? Like, I hear where do you see that in Rashi?
I think we just thought it's because his emphasis was more on the world of Muchan as opposed to the world of Tovat Kliyanov. It's all about.
I hear the nuance you're coming from. Yeah. I don't say more because I hear I haven't picked up or focused on this sufficiently. I do hear there's a bit of a difference in the nuance and language of Rashi, but I want to reflect on it. So I'm going to put that on hold. Yeah.
The doors are designed; they can be designed to be dismantled
or they're made to be nisparak. I don't know if that's a flaw in the design or. Yeah, asuyin, but I don't know if asuyin means that this is a design feature or a design flaw. Asuyin means they're made in a manner in which they fall apart. Correct, but whether that means that they're designed to be taken apart or they've got a tendency to fall apart. Yeah.
Well, the implication is that taken off or it's dismantled or detached, and you can put it back.
Yes.
What if you were, you've got a door, you could use it as a tray, you could use it for another function. Does that then make it Muktza?
Okay, so this is a superb point, and this really is the next Torah that I wanted to come on to. So this is a very, very important point. Okay, so just to summarize what we said so far before we move on, one is that we looked at the Gesa, in the suggestion of the Gesa and Tosis, and we used that as just a springboard really to discuss something that we'll discuss in the rest of the Perek, which is the degree that Muktza is related to not being Muchan, and the degree that that's synonymous with not being a Kedi, and other related matters. The second thing was really just a small ha'ara, that the Ritva seems to think there's a chiddush in saying that the Delis, even when it's attached, isn't Muktza, because it has a tendency or is designed or has the habit of falling off and separating, and therefore you may have thought you have to separate it. Let's now move on to the core svara as to actually why is the detached Deles not Muktza. And in a sense, Paul has already put forward two different svaras for that. And really all I wanted to do was work through the Shonim and emerge with these two svaras. One svara could be because it currently has an independent use as a delet. And the second svara could be because it's reattachable, and therefore it's not Muktza because it could be reattached to the lid. So really what I want to do is just put your point on hold, which is a very, very valid and important point, and just learn through the Rishonim and see what svaras emerge. So again, just to summarize what we're trying to do, the Gemara tells us, the Mishnah tells us that a delet of a kedi that gets detached is not Muktza. And we need to understand why. Why is it not Muktza? I mean, once it's detached, it can't serve its original function as a delet of a kedi, seemingly, and therefore why isn't it Muktza? That's one way we can ask our question. A different way we can ask the question is really Tosfos, who asks how is this different to Shivrei Kelim, right? The halacha is that a Shever Keli is Muktza. Why is a Shever Keli Muktza? Because it's true, when Shabbos started, it was a very fine vase, which is a kedi. But now that the cat knocked the vase off the shelf and it's smashed into pieces, it's shivrei kelim, it's useless, and therefore it becomes muktzah. So why is the deles not the same as shivrei kelim? So Rashi answers the question, and Rashi says because it's a kedi agav avian. It's a kedi Mikoyach or incidentally after its parent Kedi. And Tosa says that it's not the Delosos HaKelim is not the same as Shivrei Kelim, because with Delosos they are still purposed for their original function, which is to act as a door or a lid of the utensil. Whereas with Shivrei Kelim, the suggestion that they shouldn't be Muktza is because of repurposing them to a new use. So a vase which smashes and you now have scattered glass, everyone would agree that's Muktza because it's completely useless. The deles of the cupboard isn't Muktza because it still is linked to its original use. The scenario of Shivrei Kelim, which Tosfos talks about, which aren't Muktza, are not Muktza because you can use them for some new use. So this is really the lomdus that Tosfos says. He says, our Gemara says that it's a bigger chiddush where it became broken before Shabbos than when it became broken on Shabbos. Why? Because in the case where it became broken before Shabbos, already before Shabbos, it wasn't serving its role, and therefore you could think that at the start of Shabbos, it isn't serving its role, and therefore it should be, it's not a KD, it's not attached to the original utensil, and therefore you should think it's Muktza. But in the case where it broke on Shabbos, so at the start of Shabbos, it was a KD. Translation of it being a KD that is made for any use. The whole point of a KD is that it's there to serve people, and therefore it's there to serve any use. It now detaches itself. However, that doesn't remove it from still being made for its usefulness. Why? Because the plan is eventually it still lingers, it still remains with its original purpose, because it still is meant to be reattached to go back to being the door of the cupboard, whatever it is. That's with Zolosus, says Tosfos. When it comes to Shivrei Kelim, however, the whole point is that even though it was part of KDA at the beginning of Shabbos, once it broke, I now want to repurpose it for a completely new function. Repurposing it for a new function is to try and make it into KDP. Very nice, but the whole lomdus of Muktza on Shabbos is that you can't repurpose things. If it broke before Shabbos, so already before Shabbos it came into Shabbos not as KDA but as KDP. It's got usefulness for it, so fine, it wouldn't be Muktza. But where it breaks on Shabbos, it ceases to be KDA. Therefore, that preparation isn't there. And the whole lomdus of Muktza on Shabbos is that you don't make something doesn't become Mukhan on Shabbos if it was useless at the beginning of Shabbos. Therefore, how would this Shabbat get the status of KDB on Shabbos? That would be the reason why it's a greater chiddush to say that nonetheless it isn't Muktza on Shabbos, because since it started Shabbos as a KD, albeit KDA, even though now it's broken and becomes KDB, nonetheless it wouldn't be Muktza. That's the svara of Tosfos. Is this clear to people? Was this how does this logic make sense? Yeah.
If I just ask a quick point, with the my assumption throughout all of this is that it is mutter to reattach the doors on Shabbat. There's no issue of binyan or something like that, or is that not correct?
So we will see later a shonim that talk about whether you can reattach them on Shabbos, but that's not the point really of the lomdus that we said. Even if in practice you can't reattach them on Shabbos, nonetheless they are not. They don't cease to be kelim because the plan is to reattach them when you are able to do so. Most of the Rishonim don't mention that you can reattach them on Shabbos. In fact, certainly there would be an Issa Drabonim to do so. That's the Halacha L'maisa. It would be Issa Drabonim to reattach a keli on Shabbos. Nonetheless, it's not really the point whether you can in practice reattach them on Shabbos or not. The point is, has it lost its original functionality? Again, Muktza, the terms that we need to think about when we talk about Muktza are functionality, hachana, preparedness. The question over here is, why was the deles a keli? The answer was because it was the lid of a keli. That's what agav avion means. Has it ceased to be the lid of a keli? Has it lost its functionality? Has it lost its purpose? The answer is no, because I'm going to reattach it. Even if momentarily, i.e. for the next 24 hours of Shabbos, I can't reattach it, it hasn't lost its functionality, and therefore the Mishnah is arguing that it wouldn't be Muktza. The lomdus of our Mishnah is that it hasn't lost its functionality. It came into Shabbos as a lid, and it what we're calling KDA, and it remains through Shabbos as KDA. In the case of Shivrei Kelim, says Tosfos, it's true it continues to have a functionality, but it's a new functionality. It came into Shabbos as a pot, and now it's a shard, which has use, but not the same functionality, and therefore it's a greater chiddush that wouldn't become Muktza on Shabbos.
But wouldn't that make it a kli shemelachta me'isa?
Sorry, Josh, and then I'll come to going. Yeah, sorry.
Would that not make it a kli shemelachta me'isa? So you'd have
Kli shemelachta me'isa is something where the usefulness is an osa act, like a hammer, where the very preparedness and functionality it has is an osa functionality. So that's not relevant over here.
Why? Because at the door, its preparedness is to be reattached, which potentially could be prohibited.
No, its preparedness is to be a lid, which isn't an osa functionality. It happens to be that on Shabbos I can't reattach it. It hasn't lost its preparedness, which was to do a perfectly mutter activity. A hammer is muktzah because the hammer's kadiness, its preparedness, its functionality is itself an osa action.
I see. Okay.
The Mishnah says with Daltoteihem in my hand. Are we talking about the lids become detached and you can move this useless thing separately from the keli that's useful? Or are we talking about putting the lid on and keeping it as a functioning?
As far as we've seen, I'm arguing in. Firstly, your question is excellent, meaning we will see a debate in the Rishonim about this. But as far as Tosfos is concerned, what we've seen in Tosfos, the point isn't that I'm still able to use it now. The point is the usefulness lingers because it still keeps its old functionality because it's going to get back to that functionality, and therefore what stops it being Muktza is that it still has the functionality of lidness about it, because it was a lid and it will be it was used as a lid and it will continue to be used as a lid. And the point isn't, as Joshua said, whether in practice I can reattach it, and the point isn't even whether I could use it for now. It's not the current usefulness that makes it not Muktza.
The lashon of in my head is if you can't remove the lid by itself. And if you then say you can, so you're saying we have a lid that's become detached that still has the still considered a kli, even though it's now a useless item. But you can't, if it was really still a kli, you'd be able to move it by itself.
I don't know, and I hadn't thought about the language of Imayim, but two thoughts spring to mind. The first is, again, it depends where you put the comma. If Kol HaKelim and Tonim Shabbos of Daltoteihem Imayim means while they're still attached, then that's correct, with Daltoteihem Imayim. And then there's a separate halacha, the Afal Pish and Nisparku B'Shabbos, the Afal Pish and Nisparku, even if they get detached. So the Afal Pi is coming to contradict the Imayim. All Kelim can be moved, and their Dalas can be moved with them. And now with another halacha, even though they become detached. This in a way ties into the Ritva that saw these as a separate chiddush. The other thing that springs to mind, and again, I hadn't thought about this nuance of the language, so I'm just speaking off the cuff, as it were, is maybe it means the lomdus that we're saying. In others, maybe it's a conceptual idea. So also saying in means the lids can be moved with them. Not that physically it always has to be together, because if it breaks, it physically isn't together. But the status it has as a movable entity, as a non-mux entity, is because it's part of the functionality of the keli, which is what Rashi labels agav avian. So those are the two thoughts that occur. Yeah.
This might be inconsequential, but in Tosfot it says could that mean that it could serve something right now? You don't reattach it, but it could physically cover.
I don't think so. It is consequential, by the way. The diuk is an important one. I think what he means is, since it can become reattached, not that at this particular point in time I can attach it. I'll tell you the truth. Even if I'm not right in Tosfos, and I'm not 100% sure I'm right in Tosfos, the reason I printed these other sources because they say this explicitly. So let's have a quick look at the Chidush Aran. He says, "Aval Delossus HaKelim." This is the second column. The Delossus of the Kelim, they're suitable to returns. The Shamish melachot Rishona, to go back to the original purpose. Etc. So I think the Ran says clearly the point is that since they were muchan on Erev Shabbos, and they haven't lost, they are royal achsiun komon. They are fit for being returned to their place. They haven't lost their status. And I also printed the Tosfos Rid. In the second line of the Tosfos Rid, it says, I mean, there maybe you can catch about the language what he means. It says, I backpedal a little bit on the Rid, whether the language of the Tosfos Rid is clear or not. Okay, so it seems to me that in Tosfos and in the Ran, and I think in the Rid also, the point is that they can get back their old functionality. Again, I don't want us to lose sight of the wood from the trees. Whether the point is that on Shabbos I can put them back, or whether the point is that on the weekday I can put them back, either way, the point is they remain lids. They haven't got a new functionality. It's still a delet. It's still a lid. That's the lomdus according to Tosfos and the Ran, as far as I can. The Chidush Aran, as far as I can tell. There is an alternative lomdus over here, which is that the reason the Teles is not booked on Shabbos isn't because of the lidness that it still possesses, but because of a new functionality that it gets, which is it can be used as something else. And we've run out of time now, but I'll simply draw your attention to source 6, which are labeled Chidushim HaMiyuchosin Laharan. The background to this is that there was a text from someone in the Spanish school of Rishonim that was floating around that for many centuries was labeled as the Ran, but for many reasons, including that it consistently contradicts the Ran, we now know it's not the Ran. It was a different Rishon from that era, but we don't know who it is. But it is treated as having the status of the Rishon, so it's called Chidushim HaMiyuchosin Laharan, the Chidushim that was scribed miyuchas to the Ran. And he says, let's just read the words very quickly. Even though when Shabbos came in, they did not have a Torah's Keli, they can be moved off their own back. So he says a different lomdus. He says the reason that they are usable, they're not Muktza on Shabbos, isn't because of the agav avian inherited status that they have from their original functionality, but because they can now be used as a lid and the like. In Mitzvah Hashem on next Sunday, we'll see a third Torah that they can be used for something else, but we'll come to that. We'll come to that on Sunday. So just to summarize, it looks to me from the nuance of the language of Tosfos and the real run, and the Tosfos Rid, that the point is that since you could reattach them, that's enough. That's how they say it. The Chidushim and Richosim run, which I've labeled source 6, says the point. I see there's 2 source 7s here. Okay, says the Lomdus isn't that it could be reattached, but the Lomdus isn't because it could be reattached. The Lomdus is even now it currently can be used as a lid of the utensil, which I think was the shayla that you asked. Okay, so we'll stop there for today, Mitzvah Shem, and then we'll carry on next on Sunday.